Alrighty then. Well, um, I'm going to tell you another story again about an incident where this one there were threats made against me by the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police. In the 1980s, in the late 80s, there was an OPP at the Perth detachment, a fellow by the name of Wayne Pickett, and Wayne Pickett was universally hated. Even the other police officers hated Wayne Pickett. Nobody wanted to ride with him and whatnot. You know, he was always by himself in the patrol car because nobody wanted to partner up with him. He just was not very well liked. And there were good reasons for that. He was a miserable person and he was very corrupt. And corruption isn't unusual amongst the police, but still, this guy stood out even amongst their ranks as a corrupt police officer. Anyway, Wayne Pickett, for whatever reason, zeroed in on me when I was a young man, you know. And he started pulling me over anytime he saw me. And what he'd do is he'd haul me out of my car and beat me up. He'd just pummel me, work me over and everything. Roar at me and work me over and everything, you know. And this went on for a few years. There was one time he followed me from actually it was the first incident I had with him. I was working in Carleton Place, in the town of Carleton Place, at a separate school there, a Catholic school. I was doing custodial work. I was an on-call custodian, so I went wherever I was needed. This was back in 1988. I was driving a 1979 Buick LeSabre Limited sedan at the time. Wasn't in too bad a shape. It was a decent car. Anyway, I came back. It was midnight when I came back to Perth from my work and my shift at the school. And I decided I was going to go up to the Tim Hortons place there on Highway 7 and get myself a dozen donuts to take home. I figured I'll have them for breakfast tomorrow, something to snack on, and so on, you know. So I was going to get a dozen donuts. So I go up to Tim Hortons. In those days, Tim Hortons used to give police officers free coffee and donuts. They eventually rescinded that policy, but for quite a while that was the policy. Tim Horton, who the franchise is named after, who these stores are named after, was a hockey player. And his business partner, who started the business with him, was a police officer. And I think this is probably the reason for the free donuts and coffee policy for police. Anyway, they eventually did away with it because it wasn't good for business. People really aren't comfortable to go into a place that's full of police officers. You know, most people just aren't comfortable in a place like that, you know. So it wasn't good for business, and I think that's why they discontinued that policy. But at that time, that was still a policy there. And so if you went in there at night, it wasn't unusual that there'd be a bunch of police officers sitting in there. Anyway, this was my first run-in with Wayne Pickett. I came in there, and I was standing in line. There was a couple of people ahead of me ordering whatever. And I felt somebody's eyes just boring through me. And I look to the side, and I see this OPP, this great big, hulking, blonde-haired guy in an OPP uniform, sitting at the end of the counter on a stool, and he's just glaring at me. Yeah, I could tell he was sizing me up for a beating. You know, I knew. It wasn't the first time I'd been sized up for a beating by another man, and I knew that's what it was. So, of course, that made me nervous, because you never win a fight with a cop. I mean, even if you were to win somehow, you know, let's say I got a lucky shot in and I punched him and I knocked him out. I'd be going to jail probably for the rest of my life. That's if the OPP didn't murder me when they caught me, for doing that to one of their own. And it wouldn't matter that it was the cop that started the fight. That'd make no difference, If a police officer is beating you up, you're expected to stand there with your arms hanging limply by your sides and take the beating, And if you don't do that, then you're a bad criminal and you're going to go to jail for a very long time. That's if they let you live to go to jail. They may just get rid of you, before you ever see jail. Anyway, I knew it was a no-win situation, and it made me uneasy. Anyway, I got my donuts and I got out of there, put my donuts in the car. I got in the car, start the car up. And when I see him, he went out behind me and he went to his patrol car. And I thought, the son of a bitch is going to follow me out of here and he's going to do something to me. And I sat there for a long time. I wouldn't move, and he didn't move either. And then I figured, well, sitting here like this, I'm giving him grounds. They could call it suspicious behavior or something, I'll be giving him grounds to come over here after me. So I decided I would take a chance and leave, which I did. I left the parking lot. Well, sure enough, he pulled in behind me. He followed me down the road just a little piece. And of course, he lit me up. Lights all came on. He come storming up to my car, opened up my door, screaming at me, just roaring at me, and he hauled me out of the car by my throat, slammed me up against the side of the car several times, punched me in the gut a couple of times, doubled me over, and then just left me there on the side of the road by my open car door, Went back to his patrol car and took off. Anyway, after that, this happened. Every time he saw me, he'd do this. And I got that I started to run the police. If the police tried to pull me over, I would run them. And I was good at it, because I knew all the back roads, and they really didn't. And a lot of the local cops aren't local. They're from other places. And what they do is, because Perth area is considered a backward area, when a young cop starts out, they either send them up north to fight with the Indians, or they send them to hillbilly country, which is what Perth, Smith Falls, Carleton Place, Elmont, Lanark, and so on. That's what that is. That's hillbilly country. And so they're either going to fight with the Indians or they're going to fight with the hillbillies. That's what happens. And then after they put in their time doing that, which was nobody really wants to go there, then they get their pick of where they want to go after that, and most of them choose to relocate closer to home. Well, in those days especially, what it meant is they knew all the main roads, but they didn't know the back roads. In my case, I knew every dirt, goat path, and trail like the back of my hand. And I'd get onto a back road, and I'd get away from them. And I did that many times. And of course, that pissed them off, and it made them come at me even more. But, I didn't want this guy beating me up. I wasn't sure who it was that was trying to pull me over. So I would just assume it was him, and I'd take off. Anyway, if I thought there was any prospect of getting onto a back road, then that's what I would do. I'd take off and I'd get onto a back road and I'd lose them. And like I say, I was really good at it. And with those old cars, those big old rear-wheel drive body-on-frame cars, I could make those cars do things that, you'd be impressed if you saw what I could make a car like that do. I was really good. And on those gravel roads, I could do some pretty good tricks anyway, and I could get away from them. But, and I used the fact that they didn't know those roads against them, and it worked pretty well anyway. I could disappear very quickly if I needed to, and just go into that maze of gravel roads there, and that was the end of that, Anyway, still, there were times when the prospect of getting away just wasn't there, and I knew it. So I'd have to pull over and take my beating if it was him that was pulling me over. And most of the time it was. Anyway, I remember one time at night he pulled me over and he hauled me out of my car by my throat and he gave me a smack across the side of the head. And then he shoved me back into the car and he said, "Follow me." And anyway, he turned down a street called Drummond Street in Perth, which would take you out of town eventually. And I thought to myself, if I follow him, he's going to take me out to the country and he's going to murder me. That's what I figured. Now, I don't know if that was his intention or not, but that's what I believed his intention was, and I probably wasn't too far off, really. Anyway, I let him, because he was driving fast, so I let him get some. I just gradually slowed down, and I got some distance between us, and I turned onto a side street. I mean, my car went sideways as I went around the corner onto a side street, and I abandoned the car on a side street, and then I walked home. And I was ducking anytime I saw anything, any lights or anything. I was ducking behind hedges and everything else, to avoid detection, because I didn't know if it was him maybe driving around looking for me. Anyway, I went up in the light of day the next day and got my car from where I had abandoned it. But anyway, that's the situation I was in with this fella by the name of Wayne Pickett. And I knew a lot of other people that had dirty tricks played on them as well by him. And so he just was a very volatile person. My barber, a fellow by the name of Nick Hogan, I can say his name. He's dead now, so I can say his name safely. He told me that Pickett had come in there for a haircut and threatened him. He was sitting there making all kinds of threats, telling him, "Well, you're going to know who I am," and all this business, Yeah, you know who I am. You're going to know who I am, and all that, And another friend of mine had turned off of Highway 7 to go up the Lanark Road in his car. And it was quite dark up through there at that time. There was no lighting up there at that time. So at night, that road got really dark. Anyway, he turned the corner, he went up the road a little bit, and here's the back end of a police car. The car was sitting there completely dark, parked right in the center of the road. Anyway, he swerved and went around him, because otherwise he would have ass-ended this patrol car. He caught the back end of it in his headlights just as he come up on it, so he swerved and went around. Well, then, of course, all the lights come on, Pickett pulled him over, and at that time, Pickett did have a partner. This was before they got that they wouldn't ride with him anymore. And Pickett just went fishing, looked for some reason to charge him. And it ended up, he and his wife was with him, they were going to a party in Lanark. And he had an open container of alcohol on the floor in the back seat that he was taking to the party. Well, that was considered, you can't, under Ontario law, you can't have that. He'd have to have it locked in the trunk of the car in order for it to be legal to have it in the car. Once the seal is broken, I guess he wasn't aware of that, and so Pickett charged him for that. Anyway, but yeah, this is the stuff this guy would do. Anyway, moving ahead a few years, not too many years, but a few years, I was driving a taxi cab in Perth, and I got a call to go to the village of Port Elmsley, to the hamlet of Port Elmsley, which is a little hamlet halfway between Perth and Smiths Falls on Highway 43, and to pick up a man off the side of the road. Now, those kinds of calls always made me nervous. When the call come from somebody's home saying you can pick this guy up off the side of the road. Because what that meant is that they had put him out of their home. They didn't even want him waiting on their property for a taxi. So this was going to be a problematic person. And yeah, I was concerned. I had my guard up. But still, it's my job, you know. So I go out there, I find the guy on the side of the road. He gets in the car. We're heading back to Perth. It's nearly midnight. It's after dark. It's nearly midnight. And there's a power outage scheduled for midnight. Ontario Hydro was going to basically cut the power to the whole town to do some sort of maintenance at midnight that night. And we were about 15 minutes away from that when I picked the guy up. So I'm driving him in the town, and he says to me, he says, well, unless you get me to the bank before the power goes out, you ain't getting paid. Because he said, I don't have any cash on me. So anyway, we got in the town there just, maybe 3 minutes before midnight. And I come up the main street, and I cross lanes, and I parked in front of the bank, but pointing in the wrong direction. So, you know, traffic would be the lanes that go this way. I was going this way. I come across, crossed the lane, and parked in front of the bank. So I was pointing this way, but on the, you know, the traffic would come this way. But there was nobody around. There was a Ford Ranger pickup truck sitting a block away at a red light. And other than that, there was no traffic. And the way the laws at that time at least worked, where taxi cabs were concerned, taxi drivers were allowed to do certain things that normally you wouldn't be allowed to do, as long as we did them safely. We couldn't put the public in danger doing these things, but we could do them safely. There was a law that exempted us from having to wear a seatbelt. If we had a customer in the car, we didn't have to wear a seatbelt. If we felt that customer might be violent, that they might be dangerous, we were allowed not to wear a seatbelt. Because you don't want to be strapped down to a seat if you have to fight with somebody. Somebody starts attacking you. And so we were exempted from having to wear seatbelts under certain circumstances. There were a bunch of laws that applied to us as taxi drivers that allowed us to do things that the general public couldn't do. Now, we weren't supposed to abuse those things, and I didn't. But there were a few times that I didn't wear a seatbelt because I felt that I had a dangerous person in my car. And like I say, I occasionally did a maneuver like that to get a customer where they needed to be as quickly as possible. And always safely. And in this situation, I did it safely. As I said, the only vehicle visible was a Ford Ranger pickup truck, and it was parked a block away, sitting at a red light. So, you know, there was no danger in what I did. Anyway, the drunk guy fumbled with the door, managed to get out of my car with a great deal of effort. He fell down when he closed the door. It was an 84 Buick LeSabre, this car was, so it had fairly heavy doors. You know, it was a big old boat of a car. This was 1990 when I was driving a taxi. He slammed the door and he fell down. You know, managed to get himself upright, went down the front of my car, went to turn the corner to went down the front passenger side of my car, the front fender basically, turned to go around the front of the car to go into the bank. When he went to turn to go around the front of the car, he fell down again. Fell down in front of my car. Managed to struggle, got himself back up, made it as far as the curb, tripped on the curb, landed on his face on the sidewalk. The guy was completely wasted. Managed to get himself back up again, stumbled across the sidewalk, fought to open the big heavy bank doors, because he was going to use the machine in there, the bank machine. And anyway, fought to open those doors for a bit, finally got into the bank. And the guy was in the bank probably for a minute or 2 minutes when this Ford Ranger pickup truck that had been sitting at the red light pulls right up in front of me with its high beams on, shining through my windshield. Well then, so he's blinding me now. Then a spotlight shines through the passenger side window, and it's one of the perf police. It's a cop that I had a bad history with by the name of Dan Sisti. And it was Dan Sisti's son that I'd thrown out of the gas station for threatening me. And I tell that story in another video. And so Dan and I had a bad history anyway. But anyway, it was Dan Sisti, the perf cop. One of the perf cops anyway. And then another perf police cruiser come around the corner. So now there's 2 perf police cruisers there. Because at that time, the town of Perth had its own police department. Now they're patrolled by the OPP. Anyway, Pickett, it turns out it was Wayne Pickett in the Ford Ranger truck. He was off duty, but it was Wayne Pickett. He opens my driver. Well, the first thing that happened was the spotlight shining through the side of my car. Of course, that got my attention. And then Dan Sisti roars out his window. He roars, shut down your vehicle now! Like that. Shut down your vehicle. Do it now! Like that. So I'm actually turning the key back to shut the engine off, and my door opens up, and Wayne Pickett takes me out of the car by my throat again. This was like old hat for me. I had been taken out of the car by my throat so many times by this guy. And he took his badge, and he drove his badge into my face. And then he starts roaring at me that he's going to send me to jail and all the rest of it. And he's claiming that when I crossed lanes, I nearly took the front end off his truck. This is what he's claiming. Yeah, so here we are anyway. And then he told Sisti had gotten out of his car, and he told Sisti, he told me, he said that I had effed him out of getting into the machine. Now that drunk guy was in there, and he was going to miss his opportunity to use the bank machine because of me. So that's what it was about anyway. And then he told Sisti, he said, I want this son of a bitch charged. Anyway, the 2 cops had gotten out of the other patrol car. They're standing on the sidewalk watching all this go down. They're not saying anything. Sisti, he tells me, he says, you stand there and don't you dare move. He said, if you make one move, he said, you see those 2 guys over there? You make one move and they will fucking shoot you. So he said, don't you dare make one move. Anyway, he came back, and Pickett came out of the bank and got in his truck and left. Well, Sisti was writing a ticket. Sisti charged me with dangerous driving. And in the meantime, my boss, who owned the cab company that I worked for, he happened to be walking up the street, and he saw the whole thing. But I didn't know this because I had cops shining flashlights in my eyes and everything else, and bright beam headlights and spotlights and every other damn thing. So I didn't see him. But he actually walked right past it. And he saw what happened. And he knew that what I had done was not illegal. And so I figured I was going to lose my job over what had happened, So I go to the gas station, and he's already there, because he was actually walking to the gas station when we worked out of, because that was his gas station, when all this went down. Anyway, I told him the story. I said, look, do I still have a job? And he said, yes, you still have a job. You didn't do anything wrong. He said, I saw the whole thing. And I said, oh, good. Then you can testify on my behalf as to what happened. And he said, no. He said, just pay the ticket, plead guilty, and pay the ticket. I don't want any trouble. He said, I know. that asshole cop, that Pickett, and he's crazy. He's mean and he's crazy, and I don't want any trouble. Just pay the GD ticket, he said. Plead guilty and pay the GD ticket. So, anyway, and he said, and if you don't, then I will fire you. If you fight the ticket, he said, I will fire you because I don't need any trouble. So that was it anyway. So it ended up that I wanted to take Pickett's badge. I really did, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to go about raising enough hell that he'd get into some kind of trouble. Because I was fed up to the back teeth with the guy. You know, he'd just gone too far that time. And he'd gone too far lots of other times too, but now it was like, this is it. I'm not taking any more shit from this asshole. So, I was looking for witnesses. I was talking about that I was going to do whatever I could to see that he was no longer a police officer and all the rest of it. Well, I guess word got back to the OPP that I was looking to get rid of one of their own. And even though they didn't like him, he was still one of their own. So, a few days after this incident, I dropped an old drunk guy off at a farmhouse in the back country. And this was on one of the dirt roads. You hardly ever saw the OPP on the dirt roads, you know. But anyway, I dropped the guy off. I come out the laneway, and I didn't go very far. I went maybe a half a mile, and the red lights are going. I'm being pulled over. Anyway, 2 OPP pulled me over. I don't know who they were, but they were driving an OPP patrol car, and they were in uniform. They pulled me over, and one of them opened my door and hauled me out of the car, and he put the gun to the side of my head. And he said, if you make any complaints about Officer Pickett or anyone else, you will be found dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head, and nobody will ever know how it happened. Is that understood? And I just nodded and said, yes, sir. And he said, good. He said, get out of here and don't be running your mouth anymore about the OPP. So that was, anyway, an experience that I had. When I went to pay the ticket, I was mad about having to pay it, having to plead guilty and pay the ticket. And when I went to pay the ticket, I already wasn't in a good mood. And then the court clerk decided he was going to rub it in. And he says, so have you learned a lesson? Bet you won't do that again, eh? Have you learned a lesson? And I just looked at him and I said, no, I said, I haven't learned a GD thing, you asshole. You know, and I walked out. I had my receipt to prove I paid the ticket at that point, so I just turned around and walked out then. But this is the stuff that I found myself dealing with anyway. And that's just another story anyway of something that happened to me when I was young. And the corrupt police and all the rest of it. There was so much corruption here. I mean, I think there still is probably. They don't really bother me anymore, although after making this video, maybe they will. I don't know if they catch wind of it, maybe they will. I don't know, but anyway, it's just another story anyway. It's something else that happened to me. Funny thing is, in 1996, I believe it was, so about 6 years after that incident where I was told you'll be found dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head, I was charged with assault and uttering death threats and everything because of the incident with the little black fellow in Northbrook, in a little place between Caladar and Northbrook. That was in Lennox and Addington County, so the OPP detachment was in the town of Napanee, which is in Lennox and Addington County, and I was charged there because that's where the crime was committed. And what had happened there was I went to serve the guy with court papers, and he met me at the door with a rifle. And he put the end of the rifle up against my stomach. And I called his bluff. I said, either you're going to shoot me or you're going to put it aside. Which is it? I tell this story in another video anyway. He put it aside, and then I took a hold of him, and I bounced him off every hard surface in that garage. And I told him I was going to come back and murder him before I left. And I was hopping mad. And I had an awful temper back then. Could be quite violent back then. I wasn't really physically strong, and this was just a little Somalian guy in his 60s. So this isn't a bragging thing to say I beat the guy up. I mean, probably a 10-year-old girl could probably have beat that guy up, But I did it partially because I was mad at him. And I did it partially because I didn't want him to pick up the gun and shoot me in the back on my way out. And I didn't want to touch the gun because I didn't want my fingerprints on it. Because how did I know it didn't have a body on it? And so I wanted to disable him, basically, so that he couldn't do anything to me on my way out. Anyway, I had to go up to Napanee and get my picture taken and my fingerprints taken, and the detective that was charging me for the crime, he took me into, they have a lunch room there with some vending machines and tables and whatnot. He took me in there to fill out some paperwork. And he wanted me to make a list of all my friends and acquaintances and contact information for them all. And I refused. I told him that my friends and acquaintances had nothing to do with what happened, and that I wasn't going to be giving anybody's name to the OPP. Friends, acquaintances, and family members, that's what he wanted. Basically, everybody I knew, he wanted me to write their name and their address and phone number down and all that. I refused. Told him I wasn't going to give the OPP people's names and contact information. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh," he said, "you're not." Well, he said, "Tell me this. When you're found dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head, who are we to notify?" Same line that was said by the cop on the side of the road 6 years earlier. Anyway, I said, that would be a you kind of a problem, wouldn't it? I said, if I'm dead, then my problems are over. So I said, that would be your problem, not mine. But, yeah, this is the stuff that goes on anyway. But it's just funny that he said the same thing, dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head. Not if you're found, it was when you're found dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head, I didn't really like the odds when he was phrasing it that way, but anyway, that's the story. I was, yeah. Anyway, just another story anyway. I have kind of a sordid past. I ran into a lot of bad characters. And, there were times when I was a bad character because I was dealing with bad characters. And there was a time when I was quite dangerous. Not to everyone. If you didn't interfere with me, I'd never interfere with you. I didn't actively look for trouble. I didn't actively look to fight anybody or to victimize anybody. But if you were coming at me and bringing violence to me, I would retaliate in a big way, and I just was not having it. I had a lot of violence early on in life. I grew up with violence. I took a lot of beatings when I was a little boy. I got knocked across rooms. There were times I thought I was going to be killed. We had teachers that would strap as my old friend Tom Kerr, who was the custodian at the school when I was a little boy, used to say, they'd strap the shit out of you. And I experienced that too. They'd hit you with that strap until the palms of your hands bled. The edge of the strap would actually slice the palms of your hands open. And your hands would be running blood and stuff. And I went through that over trivial things. Turned around to see, because the girl sitting behind me had said something to me and I didn't hear her, and I turned around and asked her what she said. That got me strapped. Got strapped for looking out the window one time too. So, because I stopped and looked out the window and I got strapped. So, like I say, it wasn't like I was some heavy-duty felon in school or anything. This was all stuff that you wouldn't even think to discipline a kid for that stuff now. But back then, it was a different era, and they did. I remember Tom Kerr, because he remembered me getting strapped one time. He saw it happen. And he said that. He said, you know, that's what he said. He said, she strapped the shit out of you. That's what he said, you know, just the way he said it. Hey, she strapped the shit out of you. And that was true. That was true. And anyway, bottom line is, I grew up with violence. And then as a young man, I had to deal with a lot of violence on the streets. I wasn't a big guy. And I was kind of sickly, and I was tired. I was working full time, and I was working part time, and I was in school, and I wasn't well, and I was tired, and it showed. And so I was seen to be weak, and so I got targeted. You know, and I don't know. I mean, like I say, when I beat up the little Somalian guy, I don't think that was a badge of honor. Like I say, a 10-year-old girl could have beat that guy up. So, and I mean, I'm not kidding. I honestly do believe a 10-year-old girl could have beat that guy up. There was nothing to it. So it certainly isn't a bragging thing on my part. And I have my reasons for doing it. And part of it was meanness, because he had cheated me out of a bunch of money and he caused me a lot of trouble. But the other side of it was, and he just put a gun to my stomach to add insult to injury, you know. And so I was hopping mad. But it wasn't just that, though. It was also the fact that I didn't want him picking up the gun and using it against me. I wanted him to be disabled enough when I left there that he would not be able to do that. And when he set the gun aside, I sure as heck was not going to touch it and get my fingerprints on it. And so there you go. I did. So I did. It was partially what I partially to this day believe I had to do it. And I partially believe that I did it just out of sheer meanness and spite. And I think both things are equally true. One of them I don't feel any shame about. The meanness and spite thing, well, yes, that was wrong of me. And in the end, I deserved to be punished for that. And I was punished for it, too. But I was not going to give the OPP the names of everybody I know. You know, that was insane. I wasn't going to do it. But it's just funny that that cop said in Napanee, so a piece away, not another one from the local detachment, but a cop in Napanee, which is about 75 miles from here, actually said the same thing as the cop that pulled me out of the car outside of Perth 6 years earlier. Dead in a ditch with a bullet in your head. Maybe it's a coincidence, but it got my attention. I'll tell you, when that cop in Napanee said that to me, it got my attention. And I still didn't give him his list of names, though. I just told him that'd be a you sort of a problem. You know? Anyway, that's it. Yeah, these stories, they're not very nice stories, I know. Like I say, I do have a very sordid past. There's a lot of stuff in my background that isn't good. I was never really a predatory person in the sense that I didn't go after the weak, and I didn't go after people who weren't going after me. But if you came after me, I became a total piece of shit. You know, I became just a horrible person. And it was a bad idea, that's all. And I got to be that way because, like I say, I had too much violence in my background. When I was driving a taxi cab, it seemed that I had to fight constantly. That was a big turning point from me. When I saw how the police were putting people in my car who they didn't want to deal with, and then wanting to punish me when I would get into a fight with the person, with the guy, you know, and stuff like that. And I just got that I became very disillusioned, and I came to the conclusion that I had to become meaner and crazier than the people I was dealing with. And I did. I actually did become meaner and crazier than them. But only when I was dealing with them, when I was dealing with regular, decent people. And when I was dealing with vulnerable people and so on, I wasn't like that. I just want to be clear about that. I was never a predator in that sense. I was only a predator when I was dealing with predators. And unfortunately, I had to deal with a lot of predators. Anyway, that's it for now. Not a very happy story, and I'm sorry for that. But these things did happen. They're part of my life. And one of the reasons I'm doing these videos is to record the things that have happened in my life, just to say this is how I lived. These are the things that happened. And after I'm gone from this world, these videos will remain, and it's a record. And that's one of the reasons I started this channel when I became homeless. I figured I should document the thing. And then for quite a while I didn't, because I was in a kind of a depression and I just didn't care. And then one day I just picked up the phone and I started talking. About a year in, I started talking. And gradually it's turned into what it is now. All right. We'll see you later.